World Cup final, before or since, has ever finished 0-0 after 120 minutes. Only once has the destiny of football's biggest prize come down entirely to a shootout, with the score still completely level. July 17th, 1994, Pasadena, California. Brazil against Italy. A final remembered not for a single goal, because there were none. Remembered instead for 12 minutes of penalty kicks and for one man, already one of the most gifted players of his generation, who stepped up to take the most important kick of his life. His name was Roberto Baggio. This is the story of a final decided entirely by nerve. To understand the weight pressing down in this final, you have to understand what it meant for Brazil. Brazil had not won a World Cup since 1970. 24 years earlier, the legendary Pelé-led side that many still consider the greatest team ever assembled. Since then, despite producing wave after wave of brilliant individual talents, Brazil had endured heartbreak after heartbreak on the World Cup stage. Quarter-final exits, semi-final collapses, a nation that measured itself by football success more than perhaps any other on earth, going an entire generation without the trophy that defined its footballing identity. The 1994 squad was built differently from Brazil's free-flowing teams of the past. More disciplined, more pragmatic, organised by manager Carlos Alberto Pereira around defensive solidity as much as attacking flair. Captain Dunga anchored the midfield with quiet authority. Romario and Roberto led the attack, two strikers whose partnership had become the heartbeat of the team throughout the tournament. Brazil arrived in the United States as one of the favourites, but carrying also the accumulated weight of 24 years of national disappointment. Italy's hopes rested heavily on one man, Roberto Baggio. Nicknamed Il Divin Codino, the Divine Ponytail, for his distinctive long hairstyle and his elegant, almost balletic style of play. By 1994, he was widely regarded as one of the most talented and creative footballers in the world. A player capable of unlocking defences with a single touch or a sudden, unexpected change of pace. Baggio's journey to this final had not been straightforward. A serious knee injury years earlier had threatened to end his career entirely before it had truly begun. He had fought back from multiple surgeries to reach the very top of the sport. A quiet, persistent resilience that ran beneath his elegant public image. In the tournament itself, Baggio had been instrumental in dragging an underwhelming Italian side through the knockout rounds almost single-handedly, scoring crucial late goals against both Nigeria and Spain to keep Italy's World Cup alive when elimination seemed certain. Without Baggio, by wide consensus, Italy would not have reached this final at all. July 17th, 1994, the Rose Bowl, Pasadena, California. 94,194 people in attendance. Still, to this day, the largest crowd ever to watch a World Cup final. The heat that afternoon was intense, well over 30 degrees Celsius, sapping energy from both teams across what would become an unusually long and gruelling contest. From the opening whistle, both teams played with evident caution. Brazil, eager to protect their lead in a match they had not yet taken, were disciplined and patient. Italy, missing key players through suspension, including the influential Franco Baresi's defensive partner, leaned heavily on defensive solidity and the occasional spark of brilliance from Baggio. Chances were rare. Both goalkeepers, Brazil's Claudio Taffarel and Italy's Gianluca Pagliuca, were rarely seriously tested in the opening exchanges. The first half ended scoreless. The second half continued in much the same vein. Brazil had the better of the chances. Romario and Roberto both came close, and Brazil hit the frame of the goal at one stage. but neither side could find the breakthrough. 90 minutes passed, no goals. The match went to extra time, just as Spain and the Netherlands' final would 16 years later in 2010. 30 more minutes. The intense heat had visibly drained both sets of players by this stage. Legs grew heavier, touches became less precise. Both teams, exhausted, seemed almost relieved when the full 120 minutes finally elapsed, with the scoreline still unchanged. For the first time in World Cup history, the final would be decided by a penalty shootout. Italy went first. Franco Baresi, Italy's veteran captain and one of the finest defenders of his generation, stepped up first. He struck his penalty over the crossbar, missing badly. Brazil's Marcio Santos then missed as well, saved by Pagliuca. Albertino Demetrio Ivani scored for Italy. Romario scored for Brazil. Daniele Massaro had his efforts saved by Taffarel. Branco scored for Brazil. The shootout had become brutally tense. Brazil now led 3 penalties scored to 1, with Italy needing to score their remaining attempts simply to stay alive. Dunga, Brazil's captain, scored Brazil's 4th penalty. Brazil led 3-2 in the shootout. Italy had 1 penalty remaining, taken by their most gifted, most important player. Roberto Baggio stepped up to the spot. Roberto Baggio walked from the centre circle to the penalty spot. It was, by any measure, an enormous distance to walk alone, in front of 94,000 people, with an entire nation's hopes balanced on a single kick. He placed the ball on the spot. He stepped back. He took a breath. Brazil's goalkeeper, Claudio Taffarel, set himself on his line, watching, waiting, trying to read which way Baggio might go. The whole stadium fell silent. Roberto Baggio struck the ball. It rose. It kept rising. It sailed over the crossbar, over the goal entirely, into the crowd beyond. Brazil had won the World Cup. Baggio stood frozen at the penalty spot, hands on his hips, staring at the ground, unable to move for several long seconds. One of the most gifted footballers of his generation, the man who had single-handedly carried Italy to this final, had missed the single most important kick of his entire career. Brazilian players ran toward each other, embracing, falling to the grass. 24 years of accumulated heartbreak finally released in a single instant. Captain Dunga lifted the World Cup trophy. Romario, the tournament's standout player, was lifted onto teammates' shoulders. Across Brazil, an entire nation that had waited a generation for this exact moment erupted into spontaneous, overwhelming celebration. It was Brazil's 4th World Cup title, at the time more than any other nation in history. But even amid the celebration, many Brazilian players were seen consoling Baggio and his Italian teammates in the moments that followed. A small, human gesture of respect between 2 teams who had fought to a standstill across 120 scoreless minutes. Roberto Baggio's missed penalty became, instantly and permanently, one of the most replayed and discussed images in football history. For a player of his immense talent and achievement, a World Player of the Year, a Ballon d'Or winner, the man who had dragged an entire Italian team to the final almost single-handedly, the moment threatened to overshadow everything else he had ever done on a football pitch. Baggio himself spoke about the miss many times across the following decades, with remarkable honesty and self-awareness. He never hid from it, never made excuses, and often spoke of the weight of carrying that single moment for the rest of his career and life. Years later, he said that the only way he could continue playing the sport he loved was by accepting that the miss was simply part of who he was. Not something to be erased, but something to be carried with as much dignity as the goals and the genius that came before and after it. The 1994 World Cup final remains, statistically, the most cautious and goal-shy final in the competition's history. It is sometimes criticised for its lack of attacking football, its caution, its reliance on penalties rather than open play to decide the outcome. But it remains one of the most emotionally resonant finals ever played, precisely because of what it revealed about pressure, about resilience, and about the brutal, beautiful unfairness of football's biggest moments coming down to a single individual standing entirely alone. Brazil ended 24 years of waiting. Roberto Baggio, one of the most gifted players the sport has ever produced, became forever associated with a single miss. A reminder that even the greatest players in history are not immune to the crushing weight of the game's biggest stage. Both things are true. Both things matter. Football, at its most dramatic, rarely allows for anything simpler than that. 120 minutes, no goals, 12 penalty kicks. One miss that would echo for decades. Brazil ended 24 years of waiting that afternoon in Pasadena. Roberto Baggio carried the weight of a single moment for the rest of his career, with more grace and honesty than most people could ever manage. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe. We publish a new piece of football history every single day. Next time, we travel to 2022 for a team that made history nobody thought was possible, the Atlas Lions of Morocco. Until then, sometimes the loudest moment in football history is the one where nothing happens at all, for as long as anybody can bear to watch.